Good afternoon. Glad to have you all here. We're going to spend a couple minutes just talking about our cabinet selections and then open it up to some questions. First of all, I just want to say how pleased I am with this whole process. We started work on this right after the November 2nd election. Had some great help. One of the first things that was worth noting is we had just really overwhelming number of people, not only for the cabinet but for other positions, who've expressed their interest in helping us as we get Wisconsin working again and transform the state government. And so it's been an interesting process, and I particularly want to thank Mike Grebe, John Matthews, and John Hillers, our transition director, who helped us take all the different people who applied, who were referred to us, who we sought out, and try and narrow that down so that we could put together, I think, the remarkable team that we have today. Just in terms of the process, I know I mentioned this to somebody in the past, but I talked soon after the election to a number of key governors from across the country, people like Bob McDonnell in Virginia, Chris Christie in New Jersey, Bobby Jindal in Louisiana, Mitch Daniels in Indiana, and others like that. And one of the things, amongst other sound pieces of advice and perspective they gave to me about serving as a governor was, don't feel pressure, particularly when it comes to the cabinet. Spend your time putting together the right team in the right format, and it'll serve you well, whatever grief, and thankfully in our case I don't think we got any, but whatever grief you might get from some in the media about wanting certain appointments at a certain time, in the end you're going to be much better off by putting the right team together 6 months, a year from down the road. And so that's exactly what we did. We spent the time not only putting the right cabinet secretaries together, but putting the right mix within the cabinet and helping to piece together the right team when it comes to the rest of the staff that goes along with the cabinet secretary in terms of deputy secretaries, executive assistants, in many cases key division heads along the way. So the team we have assembled here today are people that by and large are people we've been working with for some time, not only in terms of interviewing, but for example with Mike Hipsch and Rick Chandler, two of our secretary appointments that we're announcing today. They're people who've been with me seriously, literally I should say, since the day after the election when I started budget briefings. So with that, I'll talk about each of them just a little bit here briefly. Mike Hipsch, someone that's well known in the Capitol, the last Republican Speaker of the Assembly, someone who served on the Joint Finance Committee, and someone who I served with for almost my entire tenure. He was elected about a year after I was to the State Assembly. I think very well respected, not only amongst Republican colleagues, but I think well respected on either side of the aisle. He's going to make an outstanding Secretary of Administration, and it's good to have someone from the Cooley region involved in our cabinet as well. You look down the line at the other cabinet picks that we've made, you have a mix of folks who've served in the legislature, as well as folks who've served in previous cabinets, folks from the private sector, and even a handful from outside of the state. You look as an example, Department of Health Services. We're able to bring in Dennis Smith, who is probably the premier expert when it comes to Medicaid in the entire country. Medicaid for Wisconsin and every other state is one of the fastest growing, largest pieces of our state budget, and one of the areas we're going to have to tackle and get under control. Dennis served as the head of CMS under both Tommy Thompson and Mike Levitt, who were both Secretaries of Health and Human Services, and is really a premier expert when it comes to that. So I thank people like Bob Wood, the former Chief of Staff for Governor and Secretary Thompson, people like Congressman Paul Ryan, and people like Governor Bobby Jindal for helping me recruit Dennis to that position. You look at someone like Eloise Anderson, who's been the head of social services in California, but years ago served here in Wisconsin under Governor Thompson, and before that, years prior to that, served under County Executive Jonathan Berry. Brings a wealth of experience when it comes to children and families. Certainly when we talk about commerce and our ideas to transform the Department of Commerce into the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation, I think there's no better pick than bringing in Paul Jaden. Paul heads one of the most successful chambers not only in the state but throughout the Midwest and around the country, the Greater Green Bay Area Chamber of Commerce. In the past he served as the mayor of Green Bay and the head of personnel. Again, great background in terms of both government and politics, as well as working in the private sector as one of the premier economic development specialists, and someone who, quite frankly, had we not recruited him, probably would have been recruited nationally to pick up even bigger economic development efforts than where he's at right now. Again, a great array of folks. You've got others like Chandler, who's been at the Department of Revenue Secretary in the past. It was Tommy Thompson's budget director. You got other tried and true experts like Ben Bransell, who was Secretary of DADCAP, Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection under Governor Thompson. He and I had served together when he was Speaker of the Assembly and co-chair of the Joint Finance Committee. Again, a wide array of expertise. And then you get others that come completely from the private sector, like Manny Perez, who's worked in several capacities in leadership and manpower, and for the past several years has had his own manpower-type work placement company. Just sold that recently, which opens the door for him to serve in our administration when it comes to workforce development. And someone like Wayman Winston, who has about 14 years of management experience at WIDA, and most recently has been involved in economic development in Atlanta through their authority there. And welcome back to the state of Wisconsin. So as you can see, we've got a rich diversity of people in terms of backgrounds, where they come from, what role they played professionally, be it in government, be it in the private sector, in some cases a mix of that. You've got Dave Ross, the mayor of Superior, who spent 20 years in private business, who has done a tremendous job of turning Superior around, not only in terms of the budget, but also in terms of managing city programs so that they were much more customer friendly, something we're looking for out of reg licensing. You've got a wide array of experts that are part of this cabinet, and I couldn't be more thrilled that they're going to be a part of our team. And it's just to give you one example, beyond just the cabinet secretaries, and I'm not going to go through all of the deputies and executive assistants today, because in some cases they're still setting up meetings with the key teams back in the agencies they're going to be running. But give you an example, in DHS, Dennis Smith will be our nominee for secretary. Our deputy is going to be Kitty Rhodes, former chair of the Joint Finance Committee, comes out of a long experience and expertise when it comes to healthcare. It actually planned on leaving the legislature and going into working in healthcare, and instead I've been fortunate enough to recruit her to be the deputy at DHS. And another example in that same agency is Brett Davis, soon to be former state representative, who not only has had a distinguished career in the state assembly, but years ago worked for Tommy Thompson when he was Secretary of Health and Human Services. Brett will be our head of Medicaid for the state of Wisconsin, and he worked hand in hand with Dennis Smith when Dennis was running CMS in Washington as part of the federal government. So just an example of the many fine picks we have beyond cabinet secretaries, but we have all throughout state agencies, and we're ready to go. We're ready to roll. We just felt that along the way it was key to, in fact, I apologize, overlooked one other one. I don't look at the list to go through my mind. Gary Hamlin, Secretary of Corrections, has got nearly a 40-year career when it comes to law enforcement, starting up in Sawyer County, in Hayward, working his way down to the Dane County Sheriff's Department, where he served as sheriff, and most recently in the Department of Justice here under J.B. Van Hollen. He's got a remarkable record in respect in law enforcement. He's going to be a great Secretary of Corrections. So again, you can see we've got a really quite remarkable group of people working with us, both as cabinet secretaries that I'm submitting to the state Senate for nomination, and to the rest of their teams that have been assembled to help us lead the state forward and get Wisconsin working again. With that, I'll take questions if you got them.
There are some concerns that because you're naming this cabinet just less than a week before inauguration, there may be some difficulties with the transition between secretaries. What are your thoughts on that?
No, I don't think so. There's all. I mean, the bottom line is that many of these folks have already met. For example, I keep forgetting names that I haven't mentioned, but Kathy Stepp, who's going to be the Secretary of Natural Resources, already met today with Matt Maroney. Had a meeting with the DNR staff, who's going to be the deputy there. Scott Gunderson, state representative, is going to be the executive assistant. You've got people who know and understand that state agency well, who are reaching out, meeting with folks. You've had Mike Hipsch working not only with Dan Schoof, the current head of DOA, but Secretary Schoof since day one has been very much working with John Hiller, my transition director, and our team here. You've got the budget staff working day in and day out with Hipsch and his team and the folks he's going to put in place there. So I think if you look agency by agency, they've done a phenomenal job of putting people together. Working in other areas, you look at, see if I talk long enough, I remember every secretary I forget, right? Stephanie Klett, who's been the on-air talent and executive producer for Discover Wisconsin, both in the television and radio network. Is something that for the past 18 years she's been working with not only the State Department of Tourism, not in an official capacity, but in her professional capacity outside of government, but also with nearly every major tourist attraction in the state of Wisconsin. These are all people who are well-versed and ready to run, and will be ready to go come next week after I take the oath of office. The one key I should just mention, though, is it's unconventional, but the key is just because we waited till now to announce doesn't mean that people haven't been working. And as I mentioned, with a number of these key positions, Hips, Chandler, and others have literally been with me since right after the election, in here working with the key people in this current administration to make sure our transition has been smooth. And as I mentioned several times to many of you in the past, Governor Doyle, while he and I have differences of opinion on politics and some issues, Governor Doyle has been phenomenal, both to me personally, his wife, with my wife Tonette, but also with his staff, Secretary Shuf and others, have been outstanding in terms of reaching out to us, and we very much appreciate that.
Regarding the Commerce Department,
yes.
there have been some concerns from higher level members under the Doyle administration saying that there's hundreds of contracts or things that haven't been addressed with the new people coming in simply because the names weren't known. Do you have concerns about Paul's ability to get up and running and continue those agreements or contracts?
We'll be ready to go. I mean, he deals day in and day out with Commerce right now. It's interesting from their standpoint. We've been working since November 3rd. I literally started making phone calls with the regional economic development entities that are out there in terms of issues they wanted us to move forward on. So all the other economic developments outside of this current State Department of Commerce has been working with this transition team since day one. If those are issues they would have liked to have resolved sooner, it'd be interesting if they would have reported that sooner, because everybody else has been working with us, including businesses and regional economic development efforts. But I have no doubt, Paul Jaden was in again earlier today. He's on top of things. He's going to be ready to go on day one, and we're going to make it clear that Wisconsin's open for business.
You've made it clear that you want to save state taxpayers money. What kind of conversations have you had with these secretaries might be looking for on day one in terms of ways to save money within the different departments across the state? And there are certainly state employees that are on pins and needles waiting to see what their fate might be in the new year. The bottom line, our two goals are jobs. Overall it's getting Wisconsin working again, so it's jobs and getting the government itself working to balance this budget. That's incredibly important. I just had a couple of briefings earlier this morning on the state budget. I have several a day with many of the same people I mentioned that we're making appointments on as far as cabinet secretaries. But our charge more than anything is, and they all have it branded on them, is that we're expecting them to help us create 250,000 new jobs. That's as important as anything else out there. In terms of balancing the budget, we've been going through budget by budget, and it's certainly we'll take whatever efficiencies they can find. But in most cases, to balance a $3 billion budget deficit, you're talking about overall wage and benefit reforms that will happen not department or agency by agency, but will happen statewide. And you're talking about major programs. You're talking about why Dennis Smith is so incredibly important to us, making reforms in Medicaid that allow us to squeeze more dollars out there while still serving people in need, making changes in terms of local aids, so that we can better balance our budget but still do so in a way that protects core services that our schools and our local governments provide. Those are all things that won't just be on an agency-by-agency basis. They'll be on an overall budget basis.
Well, the
Day one after you put your lunch in the fridge, what's the first thing you do 8:30 Tuesday morning?
On Tuesday morning, well, we're going to talk about an assessment as to where every state agency is. Later that day, not necessarily the first thing, but that afternoon, I'm going to be meeting with the full cabinet to get an assessment as to where things are at. Obviously, they've had meetings in part of the transition, but the bottom line is they're going to find a lot more interesting things come Tuesday morning when they're in the office officially. So that afternoon, we're going to have a briefing. Probably the most important thing is I'm going to follow up with legislative leaders in the Assembly and the Senate about moving forward on our special session jobs plan, because that's really the most important thing right now. We need to get that through. We need to get it through quickly, and we need to send a clear message to the employers both within the state as well as those who might want to come to the state that things have changed and it's better to do business here.
Will the salaries of your cabinet secretaries be higher, lower, or the same as the people they replace? How is it decided?
Yeah.
When will they be announced?
For us, we'll put it out early next week when they're being officially put in the office. But overall, our goal was to keep the total amount the same or less than where the current administration's at. That'll fluctuate. What's that?
Did you meet that goal?
Yeah.
Keeping it the same or
Yeah.
less?
Mhm. Yeah. The key was though that you're going to have some that are less. They're going to have some that are more. Again, depending on background, expertise, and what it takes to get certain people into those positions. Because as you well aware right now, you have some members of the current cabinet who've been there for some time, and others who are here more recently, and so there are variations in terms of what people got when they first came in and where they're at now, depending on their experience, and so that factored in as well.
Rick Chandler had made some headlines right after the election talking about or advocating or speaking out about potential sales tax increase. Where do you stand on that?
There's not going to be a tax increase in this administration, in this budget, or in the future. And I should just clarify, Rick Chandler spoke to a group that wanted to know some options out there. He wasn't advocating for any particular option. He spoke on what the different options might be for the state government in the future. And to me, that he's not advocating it, and I certainly am not, so we're comfortable with him in the future.
Scott, the selection of Kathy Stepp might be seen as somewhat antagonistic towards career DNR employees and environmental people around the state. Today, Representative-elect Brett Halsey said putting Kathy Stepp in charge of the DNR is like putting Lindsay Lohan in charge of a rehab clinic. I mean, defend Kathy Stepp's environmental record and the selection of her for us.
Sure. In our case, the Department of Natural Resources is going to uphold the laws of the state of Wisconsin. It's not going to go any further than what the laws are. That's the expectation we have, and I think that's a clear message. We're going to have a DNR that's based on science and that it's predictable. And I have every confidence she can fulfill that. She served on the Natural Resources Board. She served leading that cause when it comes to natural resources in the state legislature. And in the private sector, she's had personal experience in industries that obviously are very much involved with the Department of Natural Resources. But for us, we're going to conserve. We understand that protect the state's economy. A core portion of that means protecting our natural resources, conserving our natural resources. Farming makes up roughly $60 billion, the state's economic impact. Tourism makes up about $12 billion. Both of those core industries are dependent on good land, water, and air, and so we're going to continue to protect that. But we're going to do it in a way that also balances that responsibility with making sure we do it in a way that doesn't devastate the state's economy. I have every confidence she can balance those two.
Some speculation, and mostly among Democrats, that the reason this announcement is coming on December 30th is because you had some difficulties recruiting cabinet members. Was it hard to find people to come to join the government in this economy?
No, actually the opposite. We have some people who've took significant pay cuts to come work for us. If anything, the biggest challenge we had was deciding amongst a series of exceptionally, in many cases, almost overqualified candidates for these positions. Now, there might be some who are fixated on failure and want that to be the answer, but the simple answer for us is we had an abundance of candidates, and we just wanted to make sure we put the right team together.
Given your majorities in the legislature, were you concerned about how many active reps you took out? You took 3 out of the assembly, but no state senators. Were you worried about how many you could take from each chamber?
No. I mean, in the end, if it had been 51, I might view it a little differently, but having 60 members there certainly gives some breathing room. Although when you look, I mean, we expect these seats to be filled fairly quickly, probably before the final vote in the state budget, in terms of when all the special session, primary and general election are completed. And as far as the special session itself, my hope is there's a whole lot more than 60 votes when these measures go through the Assembly and Senate. I think Republican and Democrat alike, there's members in the both chambers who want to see us do better when it comes to jobs. And so I'm not worried about it being a party line vote.
We have time for one or two more quick ones.
Mike Hipsch had proposed when in the legislature splitting DNR into 2 agencies, wildlife management
Yep.
and then environmental
Yep.
oversight. Any thoughts on that?
No, DNR is going to be one agency.
Scott, any thoughts on some of the, I suppose, this ambitious agenda being laid out by now County Executive Lee Holloway?
No, I wish him well. I still pay taxes in Milwaukee County. My home's still there, and so I want to make sure that as a taxpayer and as someone who cares about that community, that he does well, and I wish him the best. He'll obviously do things differently, as will whoever ultimately is elected to take the spot that fulfill the term through 2012. My hope is that they find a way to balance both the needs of the people of that community along with the needs of the taxpayers.
Any advice for him?
Spend a lot of time out of the courthouse.
Getting back to the Jaden appointment, you said Green Bay's got one of the most successful chambers in the state.
Mhm.
What is your definition of that? What stands out to you about that?
Well, I think if you look at when I've been there in the past, working with community leaders, when I met with the chamber, with the board of directors, I think you've got an actively engaged chamber, one that's had a good strategic planning process, and one that's been active in promoting business. Those are the sorts of things we want out of the next secretary. Is someone who's going to be active in pushing a plan to make this more attractive in the state. Certainly, even beyond commerce, we're going to be doing that. But I think having someone who understands economic development, who's had active experience in that, and who's had active support not only from his board but from the major businesses, big and small, in the Green Bay area, I think is incredibly positive for what that means for the state of Wisconsin. Thanks.